In this video, I will introduce you to electronic product regulations in the UK. And before we get started, I just want to mention that this video serves as a broad introduction to this topic. I will not cover every single requirement or every single regulation for that matter that could potentially apply to electronic or electrical products sold in the UK. And this video only covers requirements in Great Britain, meaning England, Wales, and Scotland. So not Northern Ireland. It's a different situation there. Right, so let's begin. First, I want to look into the scope. The thing is that different regulations apply depending on the parameters or the specification of your product. So the first we have ROHS, restriction of the use of certain hazardous substances in electronic equipment. Okay, and it applies to electronics that do not exceed 1000 volts AC or 1500 volts DC. So that would be essentially all consumer electronics covered by ROHS. And what ROHS does is that it sets restrictions on chemicals and heavy metals in electronic components. The second, we have the Electrical Equipment Safety Regulations 2016. And it covers electronics with a voltage rating between 50 to 1000 volts AC or 75 to 1500 volts DC. That will cover everything that you essentially plug into a power socket in your home. So again, um, consumer products and chargers, AC adapters, and so on. And what these regulations do is they set electrical safety requirements and also power socket and power plug requirements. Then we have the Electromagnetic Compatibility Regulations 2016, or the EMC regulations, apply to electronics in general and set requirements for electromagnetic compatibility. In practice, this is really about avoiding, let's say, uh, devices, preventing devices from interfering with other devices, essentially. And then we also have the Radio Equipment Regulations 2017. These cover devices that are radio equipment, meaning devices that communicate through Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, GPS, LTE, 5G, and so on. And they set requirements for using, well, signal transmissions and different frequency bands to make sure that, well, the right signal is transmitted to the right receiver, basically, so that things work. And number 5, we have the Ecodesign for energy-related products and energy information regulations, and these cover lighting products, certain home appliances, and so on. And what they do is that they set requirements for energy efficiency. Could be dishwashers and so on. And finally, we have the toy safety regulations that cover toys, including electronic toys, and also set general toy safety requirements. I will go into the details in a bit. So what I want to convey here is that more than one of these can apply. As a matter of fact, at the very least, you will likely need to comply with ROHS and EMC regulations. And the rest really depends on the parameters of the product. Let me show you what that can mean. So if I'm selling an LED light bulb, well, I'm selling an electronic product. So ROHS applies, and so does the EMC regulations. Well, what about this one? What about the electrical equipment safety regulations? Well, the input voltage would be what, 200, 220 volts, 230 volts? And as such, it's within the span, and thus we need to comply with this one as well. Assuming it doesn't come with any like Bluetooth module, then we would not really need to care about the radio equipment regulations. And again, it's a lighting product, so we need to comply with the Ecodesign regulations, and it's definitely not a toy, so we don't have to care about that one. The point here is, as I'm sure you understand now, that there's not a uniform set of requirements that apply to all electronics all the time. It really depends on the product and the parameters. So you need to understand the landscape and you need to understand the scope of these regulations, and then you can determine what you need to comply with. Right. So the thing is that these regulations are, let's say they are related. These are all based on European Union CE marking directives and regulations. So you could say that the overall procedure is quite similar, meaning that for all of these, you will need to confirm the regulations, okay, which could be more than one. And once you've done that, you need to look at designated standards, which are product specific. You need to arrange lab testing and you need to determine which conformity assessment procedure to follow. Phase two, you need to create label files, UKCA marking, which, well, at least partially replace the C mark in the UK. Product traceability, apply warnings, and so on. And finally, there's the documentation that you need to prepare. All of this are phases that must be carried out by the manufacturer, or the company that sells, well, brings the product to the UK. Right. So in the following slides, I will use one of these as the basis. I will not go into detail all the different regulations that I mentioned, but I think generally speaking, if you know how to deal with one, the others will be a lot easier to understand. Now, step one. Step one, you need to identify designated standards. And I will use examples from the Electrical Equipment Safety Regulations 2016. Now, whereas this regulation sets broad requirements and essentially states that uh, electrical equipment sold in the UK must be safe, it doesn't provide product specific requirements for the most part. That's why I need to look for standards that apply to my product. As you can see here, we have a few different examples, right? Conference systems. I'm not really sure what that is, but anyway, there's a standard for that. And what I need to do is I need to go to the BSI Group website. I need to identify one or more standards that apply to my specific product. You can also go to this URL, gov.uk/government/publication/designated standards low voltage. You can also find the designated standards, and that would be your first destination. Now, once you have identified one or more standards, you will also need to implement these, which requires expertise in the sense that you will need to, you will need to take the technical requirements and make sure that these are applied to, say, your PCB schematic and the wiring, the components, and so on. And finally, you need to verify this through testing. Okay, that's really the most crucial part. Second, we have labeling. So when you sell electronics in the UK, you need to apply what you see here. So that would be the name and registered trade name or trademark of the manufacturer, usually the company name, and also a post address where the manufacturer can be contacted. Now, keep in mind, the manufacturer in this case usually means the owner of the brand. So it doesn't necessarily mean your factory in China, assuming you're importing from China or, well, anywhere for that matter. It could be a manufacturer in the UK. If you go to a contract manufacturer, you order products and maybe that you have designed, or maybe you apply a brand, and you are likely to be the manufacturer, just to be clear. You also need to make sure that the product comes with type, batch, or serial number. Usually you would apply a product name, a model number, or an article number, or something like that, and also a batch number to ensure traceability. And this text is from the Electrical Equipment Safety Regulations 2016, but identical requirements in the other ones that I mentioned. Right. Other than that, you also need to make sure that when necessary, at least, the product is accompanied with instructions and safety information. Now, this is providing safety information or warnings or instructions is never a substitute for actually ensuring that your product is safe. It can only complement that fact. So you still need to comply with the standards, but you need to provide information about, say, installation, input voltage, currents, and so on, to make sure that it's, well, your customers, the consumers, know how to use it correctly. That's the second part of the labeling requirements. Third, we have the UKCA marking, which essentially indicates compliance with one or more of the regulations that I mentioned previously. And as of 2024, the UK government announced that CE marking is also accepted indefinitely, at least for the time being, for most electronic products sold in the UK. And that certainly makes it a lot easier for companies selling both in the EU and the UK, which is great. Right. Finally, we have the documentation, and the first document or set of documents is the Declaration of Conformity, and it's essentially a self-issued 1 or 2 page document where you have to specify the product name, the name and address of the manufacturer, product image, traceability system, and so on. Combined with the list of regulations, and as I mentioned, that can be more than one. And point 6, you also have the list standards. So this is a self-issued document that you have to maintain for 10 years after you stopped selling the product, which is quite a long-term commitment. But essentially, it's a self-issued document that sort of summarizes the compliance status of the product that you're selling. And it must also be printed and signed. Second, we have the technical documentation. And well, the difference is that you have to provide product information. That could be a description, functionality, bill of materials, PCB schematics, and so on. And also the list of standards and test reports. Well, let's mention down here on point F. And again, this is from the Electrical Equipment Safety Regulations 2016, but technical documentation requirements exist under ROHS, EMC regulations, and so on. And again, I mentioned the instructions and safety information, and the reason I mention this again is simply because while this could be applied as labels, as printed labels on the product or on the packaging, it's also common to include these in accompanying documentation. That could be a printed booklet, for example. But it's nothing new, it's what I already mentioned. And again, they do not provide a specific, let's say, list of contents or information that must be included. And the reason for that is simply that the instructions really depend on the product type. So there's no uniform list of items or specific precautions that must be included. That's up to you to determine. But it could be part of product standards, though.